I don't think I need to persuade anybody in this room that we have a serious challenge to free markets coming from a more activist state. We have national champions, we have state-owned companies, we have industrial policies, we have nearshoring and friendshoring, many of which we thought we'd never hear about again and are right at the centre of our politics, and all of which threaten in some ways to suppress, distort, or otherwise damage markets. But on the other hand, there are very powerful defence-related justifications for all of these things, which we've heard about today. We are confronted by an axis of authoritarians that want to destroy the free world, and in order to fight them, we have to borrow many of their methods. We have to be careful not to allow this to be used as an excuse by domestic interest groups for protectionism and the rest of it, but nevertheless, for the greater good of defending the liberal order, we're entering a world of more activist governments. But what I wanted to focus on today is the threat to capitalism that doesn't come from outside, that doesn't come from the government, but that comes from capitalism itself. In particular, the threat that comes from the growing concentration of the capitalist system and the threat that comes from information technology giants that want to manipulate our very preferences, and by manipulating our very preferences, pose a fundamental threat to the basic units of capitalist society, which are rational, self-conscious, self-confident individuals. So it's a threat to capitalism that comes from capitalism that I think is just as serious as the threat that is being generated by Putin and the rest of them. I think liberals have always acknowledged that concentrations of economic power can represent a fundamental threat to the market order. Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations was, amongst other things, a polemic against the East India Company and its extraordinary power over global trade and its very close connections with the British government. Teddy Roosevelt was in favour of breaking up the trusts because he thought it would create a new aristocracy and it would destroy the dynamism and the vigour and what he would have regarded as the manliness of American capitalism by creating an effete European-style business aristocracy. Woodrow Wilson, again, for different reasons, focused on the concentration of capital before he got distracted by the First World War. The ordoliberals argued that one of the basic causes of Nazism was the overconcentration of German capitalism under Bismarck, and they set about very deliberately untangling the connections between business and government, but also attacking some of the oversized companies. And let us not forget that neoliberalism, at the start of its long career, was an assault on the corporatism of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and an assault not just on the intertwining of business and government, but of the over-concentration of capitalism. So you had attacks on the telecom companies, the telecom monopolies, such as AT&T and British Telecom. You had the unleashing of smaller companies such as Apple and Microsoft, and constant cheering from the neoliberals of their attacks on IBM and the rest of it. We had the creation of companies from absolutely nothing, such as Blackstone or Bloomberg, and we had marvellous creative visionaries such as Michael Milken finding lots of money to fund startups. But since then, since this golden age of neoliberalism, we've seen the creation of a highly concentrated form of capitalism. We find this concentration at its worst in the most advanced country in the world, the United States, and we see this concentration at its most advanced in the most advanced areas of the economy, particularly high tech. Competition is for losers, Peter Thiel, one of the great central figures of the PayPal mafia, said, and he's right in a sense, and he has set his mind on trying to reduce competition. We have just three companies, Verizon, T-Mobile, and AT&T again, that provide 90% of US wireless services. We have Google accounting for about 90% of the global search engine outside China. We have the top 10 stocks in the S&P 500 now making up a record 35% of market capitalization of that. That's up from 20% in 1990. And we have IT companies that enjoy such massive shares of mind that when we talk about search engines, we talk about Googling, essentially. And we have challengers like BlackRock and Bloomberg and the rest of them now being vast incumbent companies. So we've gone from a world in which the main theme of capitalism and of neoliberalism was entrepreneurialism, starting from nothing and creating great companies, and has become concentration. I used to go to Silicon Valley a lot in the 1990s, and it was a world in which people were starting companies from nothing, in which the whole dream was to create something from nothing, to be a founder, to be somebody who made companies. Now, if you go there, it's basically to create something that you can sell out to one of these big giants. It's a very, very different world. And this sort of concentration, as far as I can see, is built into the nature of information capitalism. Information capitalism is all about network effects and attaching one network to another network to get broadening concerns. You know, economies of scale and scope are being replaced by economies of network effects. And AI is likely to increase this even more because the computing power that you need for AI and the number of people, actually, highly trained people that you need to check for possible mistakes and to regulate the whole process is so great that you're getting a very small number of companies, Microsoft and Google in particular, dominating this whole world. And the more we become an AI civilization, the more those companies, I think, will gain in power. And the consolidation of economic power is leading to a consolidation of political power. You have this process whereby lobbying, 70–80% of lobbying in the United States is paid for by these big private companies, particularly in IT companies. And you're getting a sort of revolving door effect whereby people who come from the government, from the regulatory sector, look for their retirement in these great big companies. Goldman Sachs is known as government Sachs for a reason. You have, I think, I remember when Barroso left the European Union, he went straight to Goldman Sachs and he replaced another creature of Goldman Sachs, who is Peter Sutherland, as another person. So you're seeing this intertwining of government power with company power, the creation of a very small set of massively powerful companies. And I think that is a fundamental threat to capitalism. Now, we've seen threats of concentration in the past. We saw them in the late 19th century. We saw them in the 1930s. So this isn't entirely new, but it's linked to something else, which I think is even more worrying. And that's the rise of information companies that specialize in sucking up vast quantities of information about you and me, everybody in this room, everybody in the world, and using that information as a way of affecting people's preferences without them really knowing what's going on. Google, Facebook, and the rest of it are in essence advertising companies. And they're in essence giving you all these free services, which we use all the time, in order to gather information about us, in order to control us or persuade us. They're hidden persuaders who want to persuade us to do various sorts of things. So their stock in trade is manipulation of our preferences, but their stock in trade is also addiction. They're in the process, they're in the business of making us addicted to our phones. In particular, they're in the business of making young children addicted to their phones, addicted to their devices, addicted to this constant set of stimuli that comes out of the information technology world. Young people conduct their lives on the screen. Their childhoods are phone-based childhoods. Their life is determined increasingly by information technology, by information stimuli. And these things are very, very addictive. I used to share an office when I was at The Economist with a guy called Chris Anderson, who went on to be to the editor of Wired. And he recently said, on the scale between candy and crack cocaine, all these information technology things are much closer to crack cocaine. So we live in a world in which the basic unit of a market economy, a rational, educated, self-confident, self-controlled individual, is being destroyed by capitalism itself, by the most powerful companies within capitalism. So the combination of concentration of power and manipulation of our choices is extremely subversive of the capitalist system. How can you exit the system when there are so few choices? And how can you make informed choices when you're constantly, unconsciously being manipulated by these information giants? Now, we need to start off dealing with the problem through a very vigorous enforcement of antitrust. I think there's been a long time when we've had a sort of antitrust doctrine, which on the conservative business side has been dominated by Robert Bork and the Borkians, who think that the only test is consumer welfare, and as long as consumer welfare is dealt with, that's fine. And on the other hand, the Louis Brandeis, who talked about the curse of bigness. His followers, very influential and important in Washington at the moment, but they connect distaste for bigness with distaste for business itself. And I think what we need is a new generation of Brandeisian pro-business Brandeisians, a sort of new sort of Brandeisianism, which is much more willing to push for breakup of big companies, much more willing to say that competition is absolutely fundamental, even if there's a short-term threat, even if there's a short-term threat to consumer welfare. So conservatism, Brandeisianism. But I think even more fundamentally than this, we need to take the threat to the individual, to the education system, to the rational operation of the individual much more seriously. We need to start being much tougher on information companies, stop them making us addicted, deal with the whole proliferation of pornography, which we have going on at the moment. And at the same time, as we're regulating these companies much more rigorously, we have to put much more emphasis on the process of education. Whenever in the past liberal philosophers have been confronted with the overwhelming power of capitalism to distort our preferences, in the past they've always argued that we need to have education, and education fundamentally in the humanities, in the humane disciplines. So if you look at John Stuart Mill, absolutely obsessed by this issue. If you look at Van Humboldt, absolutely obsessed by this issue. If you look at indeed at Matthew Arnold, again, the same notion that in order to deal with the dangerous dynamic of capitalism, we need to emphasize education in the humanities, in humanness. So I would say we're not in the 1980s anymore. We're in a very, very different world. And in order to preserve the liberal order, we need a much more ambitious, a much more active state. And that state must do two things absolutely fundamentally. It must break up dangerous concentrations of power, and it must assert the importance of education and of education in the humanities and of decoupling and preventing information technology companies from turning us into mere playthings, mere tools. In order, you cannot have a functioning capitalist order without functioning, healthy individuals. And those functioning and healthy individuals are being undermined at the moment, I think, by capitalism itself. Thank you.
Many European leaders are worried that all the big tech companies are American. After having heard you, the thought occurs, maybe you should be happy instead.
Do you use Google?
I do.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, the fact that they're all located in the United States doesn't stop them from being incredibly powerful here. I think Europe and Europeans' preoccupation with regulation is actually quite a healthy thing. I think the next few years need to be dominated by regulating these companies. It's a pity that they're all in Silicon Valley rather than rather than in Europe. But I don't. And in order to create these giants, America did some very interesting industrial policy. Essentially, gave them a huge amount of stuff free. They gave them the virtual world basically free, I think. So
we had a discussion yesterday about sort of regulating beforehand and fixing things afterwards. In what camp would you be?
Well, I don't think it matters what camp I'm in, really, because what we had, from the 1980s onwards was a sort of blitzkrieg approach, whereby information technology companies took as much as they possibly could. as rapidly as they possibly could. And when, because they thought, if this territory isn't taken by us, it will be taken by somebody else. And that's happened. So what we need to do is start thinking about regulating them, and also thinking about breaking them up in lots of ways.
Okay, thanks.